Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is with great pleasure that I'm welcoming you in the context of Vija Celmins' first exhibition in Austria, here on behalf of the Friends of the Secession. I would like to thank both of you, Vija Celmins and Robert Storr, for having accepted our invitation to have this artist talk here tonight. Allow me briefly to introduce you to our audience. Vija Celmins was born in Riga, Latvia, and moved to the United States when she was 9 years old, after having lived in refugee camps in Germany for several years. She went to art school in Indianapolis and was invited to attend a summer program for art at Yale University. There she met her fellow students, Chuck Close and Bryce Martin, which resulted in lifelong friendships. She graduated UCLA, lived and worked in LA for 19 years. In 1981, she moved to New York, where she's living until today. After abandoning her early painterly style, Celmins began making images based on her collection of clippings and photographs. She eventually developed a group of recurring themes that included limitless boundaries of natural spaces, such as ocean and lunar surfaces, and starry night skies or spider webs. Her work can be related to both the all-over composition of abstract expressionism as well as to the implied flatness of minimalist abstraction. Although she's often categorized as photorealist, she never copies anything. She rather is redescribing what she sees, pushing the material, and asking a lot from it, whether it is paint, pencil on paper, or as in this retrospective of her graphic work, using many different techniques in printing with incredible virtuosity. Ultimately, all of Vija Celmins' images evolve through our stillness, our time, and our attention. We are also honored to welcome Robert Storr as a dear personal friend and a friend of the Secession. Tonight, his biography and bibliography can fill a small booklet. You will forgive me, Rob, for keeping this introduction short. Robert Storr is a painter, critic, curator, and writer who is currently the Dean of the Yale School of Art. From 1990 to 2002, he was curator and later senior curator for painting and sculpture at the Museum of Modern Art. He's the author of many monographs, catalog texts, and articles, which have become compulsory reading for anyone interested in art. The artists he was particularly close to here in Vienna, either curating their work in exhibitions or writing about them, are Valley Export, the late Franz West, and the late Maria Lasnik. Together with Harald Seemann and others, he was one of the decisive jury members for the Holocaust Memorial on the Judenplatz. It was in no small part thanks to him that the winning project by Rachel Whitered was ultimately realized. Rob Storr was the first American to be invited as director of the Venice Biennale in 2007. The title he gave this Biennale was Think with the Senses and Feel with the Mind. I think that this is a good point of departure for our conversation tonight. Thank you.
I'm going to lead off quickly and then fall back since I'm the designated talker and questioner. I must say I've watched many rock concerts with these gizmos, and it's strange to have one for the first time. So I will try and get used to not paying attention to it. This is a pleasure to be here, and it's a particular pleasure to see this exhibition about which I knew, but which I had not seen until 4 o'clock this afternoon. And I'd like to begin with that exhibition and ask how it came about and how, in particular, your first exhibition in this country is entirely of graphic works and not of paintings or, for that matter, of drawings. That's an unusual move, and that's a good one, by the way.
Well, let me see how I sound. How do I sound? I
sound good.
I sound okay.
Sounded good, looking good.
So, you know, the president of Secession, Herwig, asked me about 2 years ago to have a show, and I couldn't do it because, well, I could do it. I was in the process of making a lot of work, and I didn't think I could put in new work. And then most of my work, because I don't do so much, is in collections, and very difficult to get it away from people. So I thought maybe I could just do the prints, since I had the prints all pretty much framed, and I was working on a new series, which is in here. And so he came over, and maybe it was his idea, Herwig. He came over, and we liked each other, and I said, okay. So then it took about a year or so to get it together, and it was really a job to install it, because, and then of course I had never been here. I came in, I knew right away, the place was just so gorgeous. You know, the light was very beautiful during the day. So I felt really good that I could do it. So, you know, then we had the problem of setting out the prints, which, because they're sort of small, it's a little, and some of them, the image doesn't carry very far. You really have to go up to it. So that's how it happened.
Well, I think one of the things that's very clear is how much power the prints have as individual units, because to hold a room this big and to draw people into the print when they're confronting all this architecture is itself a sort of test of aesthetic power one way or the other. Let me ask, you have never, to my mind, or to my knowledge, shown these early prints that are here scattered around. And for that matter, you haven't published them. And there's, by the way, a remarkable artist book that is a catalog for this show, which I think is now being released. It's, no, not yet, soon. Anyway, but it's an amazing thing. And that's part of this exhibition. It's a book that you conceived and did with the collaboration of the Secession. But in it are these early prints. For example, there's one just around the corner, which has direct quotations from Rembrandt, which I'd never seen.
And Bruegel.
And Bruegel, okay. I missed the Bruegel one. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your beginnings as a printmaker and how you sort of left behind what was then a kind of thriving tradition of gestural printmaking in the States to do something different.
I'm always sorry I left that behind. I wanted to be, like probably most art students, artists, young artists in the middle of the country, I wanted to be like de Kooning and maybe Pollock. And, you know, I wanted to do, that was the most exciting painting that we all aspired to do. So I did do, I did give it a try, and I left it, you know. I often think if I hadn't gone maybe to California, I would have gone to Yale and then to New York right away. But I went to California where there were no painters hardly at all. There were a lot of different directions going off in the light, into kind of fetishy things, objects, things that were made out of plastic that were, you know, all kinds of different directions. And what else? In painting, there was figure painting. Like when I went into a figure class in my art school in Indiana, we had to do these figures in 5 seconds, 5 minutes. I really hated that class. So, you know, I had, because I'm a more, you can tell, I'm a slower kind of artist. And at any rate, so there I was in California, and I learned a few things, I think, from maybe de Kooning. I think I learned that that the art was really maybe now not such a popular idea, that the art was really about itself, and that the art part in it was in it, not in something outside, not in even an idea outside, but was in it. I also learned that the canvas can be a whole, you know? It is not, although many artists, I was just thinking of Terry Winters, you know, use the artist as a canvas as a backdrop, but my instinct was to account for every bit of it, you know? So these are things I tried to do. The thing I didn't like is the gesture part. I couldn't come to terms. I couldn't make a painting that looked really solid and great. It's the real thing, you know? I couldn't seem to do, well, I didn't think I could do it. I guess I was a talented young woman, so, you know, then there was pop art coming in. People were beginning to do objects in the United States in the 60s. And you know, I went out there, I started doing some, print in there that is sort of a landscape with a lot of lines in it, sort of a more traditional kind of work, was because I got a car. I was driving everywhere. LA, you have to drive. I love driving. I still love driving. And I was stopping, and I was thinking, well, maybe I can put the imagery and together with the strokes, but I never really came. So I sort of stopped everything. And I thought, well, what a relief, you know. I have stopped this incredible ambition. Then I really dropped down. I dropped down in size. You know all this.
I don't.
Yes,
That's why we're
you
here.
do.
And most other people don't know that either.
Okay, I dropped down from giant, where you have to run back and forth. I was always running back and forth.
Just
you
a
know.
fact question.
Running back to look at it, running forward.
How big
And
was
I
the biggest
still
painting you
love
ever
the,
made?
huh?
How big was
What?
the biggest painting you ever made, just out of, for reference?
Maybe 10 by 10.
Feet.
Yeah. And, you know, running back. Okay, so I dropped the whole thing, and I thought I'm going to go back to some basic thing where I'm, like, you know, making marks and making, like, I'm going to look at something, like going back to looking at something. And drop down the size, no heroics, you know, no heroic color, no back and forth. So first I painted everything in my studio, the lamp, the hot plate, the refrigerator. Refrigerator was 10 by 10 too. And the heater, which is now in, you know, where is it? In the Whitney.
The Whitney, yeah.
And I painted all the stuff that turned on. I must have still been full of, you know, activity. And I painted every little thing, my radio, all the things that you could turn on and off. And I painted all the food I ate, the dishes. And I threw them away too. I threw them away. I said, no, no, no. Then I'd been collecting these clippings of, I was so isolated. You know, there was nobody. Actually, Diebenkorn was out there. He became a pretty good friend. He was always going back and forth, you know, putting on a little mark. He's a wonderful, wonderful painter, of course. And then he'd go back, and then sometimes he would invite younger people like me, and maybe Tony Berlant was a good friend of his. I don't know who else. And he would say, well, what do you think about that part? And, you know, we would say, oh, you know, great, or maybe you could put it in, you know, I had given that up. So I was sort of in a despair, so I painted everything. So I let the I let the object itself be an indicator of something that the canvas was about. And I generally made the background kind of grayish, no big deal. And I had already seen some Mirandis, which I thought, wow, these are really terrific. And because they were they carried so far. And where did I see them? I saw them in New York with a class that went to New York from Indiana. Indiana was really a lost state, believe me. And anyway, so then, then I had all these little clippings. I ran out of things to paint in my studio. I painted the table, the lamp, did I say that? The chairs. And I wouldn't let anybody in. We had this thing where you had to rent your own studio in graduate school, and a teacher came to you, which was nice. So, what is that?
That's the fire engineer or police.
Oh, yeah.
Were you showing these works at all, or was
No,
this?
no. I was not. But I did show. I had some of the work in that room was in my graduate show at UCLA. I think that that bigger landscape with all the lines on it. So anyway, then I started to paint the clippings, going over them, ant-like, sort of like a person that goes over, those airplanes that go over and follow the land. I would start at the bottom right corner and go up. It was a very instinctive thing. And I thought, my God, I'm never going to have to go back and forth again. And I'm also never going to be deciding. So the composition occurs when I pick the image, and I'm never going to be composing again. It was a relief, really. But I was doing some other thing, so I was trying to build an image. I'm not going to talk forever. I was trying to build an image, which I think part of this is still in here, although this is printmaking, which is this bizarre activity. An image that really had a physicality that stayed where it is. And where I put the images is in rooms, because I live in rooms. And most people still live in rooms. So I wanted to, have the reality in front that was flat and compressed, and perhaps also maybe, what else do I do? Kind of restrained to the wall itself, but yet had an image that wanted you to go somewhere else with it. So my feeling was, in trying to talk about it, that I could maybe leave that when you confronted this work, you would be engaged in the material. All of these ideas are ideas everybody had in New York also, and everywhere else. That you would be, but everybody takes a slightly different way, So that you'd be confronting this material. Like in this case, it's a heavy set of ink that's held there in a mezzotint, in a plate that holds and the material has an image that's like a ghost, or the image is in your head, but what's in front of you is a surface that has been accounted for and hopefully made real enough that it overcomes the image that you remember. Now, does that sound like what?
It makes perfect sense to me. And I was
Perfect sense to you. Very good.
But I wonder, if you're painting because that image will be surprising even to you, though you've labored over it and thought about it and so on, or if you make it because you want to make it a certain way. Do you anticipate the viewer, or are you simply engaged?
No. I don't ever to anticipate. Who anticipates the viewer? No, I do not anticipate the viewer. But I do like describe. And I figured that the smallest nuance of my hand and my decisions on proportion, image, how to stop it, how to render it so that it isn't aggressive but isn't weak, so that it lays in, I don't know, it's very hard to talk about, that those things will come out and give the work some kind of identity.
An independent reality of its own?
Thanks, yeah.
Okay.
So this is sort of the basic thing that I have been doing, and there's a certain, people always ask about themes, but you know, I think I picked things that were made out of a lot of small parts, because that's how I learned. That's the kind of painting I wanted. I wanted a painting that was made out of gestures, but these are the tiniest gestures. Well, so wait, another thing is, so because they cover the whole plane, you know, it's sort of like, it kind of invites you to also cover the whole surface.
Let me ask another question, and there's work that's not here, so I'm going to describe it. We thought about doing slides, and I thought, I didn't know.
Yeah, where are the slides?
I sent them away because I didn't think we'd be doing this in the gallery, and I think it's ridiculous to project slides in a room full of actual art. But I will describe a couple of things. She referred to it in part. There are some objects that she made that are trompe-l'oeil in the sense of their presence, except that they're vastly bigger than the real thing. An eraser that's yay big, a comb that's this big, and so on, pencil. That was one phase of the work. Then she also did a series of surrogates. She cast real stones in bronze and then painted the cast stones so that they resemble the real stones to the point that you cannot tell the difference. And I remember seeing that show years ago and thinking, what's going on here? Cloning stones almost, but doing it in the most meticulous way. But there's another body of work which is not represented here in any form at all, and that's a series of Reside paintings you made, one of which is an object. It's painted on a kind of doll's house version of a house, and the other one, or a couple of ones, are based on photographs from the war. And one is of a man fleeing a car, a burning car. One is of a man slumped over the wheel of a car, and the house is a house in flames. Now, you went through the war in first Latvia. You were very young, but you were in Latvia, and then you were in Germany, and then you were a refugee in the United States. Those paintings are not represented in your print production, and you haven't actually picked up on those themes since, although there's an ancillary body of work, which is airplanes, some of which are recognizably bombers. Now, you made these things in the early 1960s, and I wonder what propelled you to do them. I wondered what made you not do them anymore.
Okay, well, I think, in retrospect, because I'm a very intuitive painter, I just veer from one thing to another, and then later, when I think about it and try to put it in words, what I think I was doing is I was very isolated in California, and I was sort of reliving my childhood. I'd always lived with my parents. I was 22 years old already when I left, so I had been maybe, okay, that's one thing, that I was like sort of thinking about the past and trying to find something that was mine. And so I did a series of paintings for about 2 years that had that sort of theme. And at the same time that they had that theme, I was making these, I was kind of uniting the image with the background, so they became really very solid and about mass. And then I tried various things. There was a Vietnam War going on that was on TV all the time. Yeah, I did. I painted the TV too.
You painted actually. There's a plane going up in flames on the screen, right?
Yeah, I played a little bit. I was trying to find my way there. To paint those gray World War II things in sunny California was really something, I gather, because people just didn't know what they were about, really. I mean, they didn't know how to really take that. It was sort of extraordinary. I had a really nice show of those at the Demenil Museum and at the LA County Museum. There were only about maybe 20 pieces. So it was sort of an attempt to go somewhere that maybe was mine. With the objects, they were very much like the objects, very straightforward, no composition. But I dropped it. And then I dropped painting altogether because I was thinking I was making marks that were decorative, marks that were handsome, marks that were beautiful. I was into a rejecting mode, all the time trying to whittle down. So I worked with a pencil for 15 years, if you can believe this, because it was, I thought it was somehow that my touch would somehow be more thorough or some fantasy, which I don't think was really true. And then I scouted around for other things, I used to live by the ocean. I went down to the ocean. I was going to do a little movie about the waves, up and down, sun going down, up and down. And I took a lot of photographs. I had them all over the floor. And I thought, I had a great studio, had a 15-foot ceiling, 90 feet long, for $65 a month. And
Those were the days.
I had trash everywhere and images, and I was struggling like a young person should be, I guess. So, I started just, so what do you call it it's like a topographical map, following the image and making the ocean things, making my version of it, putting it into graphite. So that's what I did, and that's how the whole thing started, of using an image that was boundless and finding ways of concentrating it down. So that's the story.
But in the process, you abandoned making scenes where something happens for
Yes.
making scenes where essentially nothing happens.
Well, but a lot happens,
Visually, a lot happens,
Yeah.
but I'm saying there's no
No
vital...
story.
There's no story. Okay.
No story. There's a little bit of a story when you put two images together. After I had done, about 30 drawings or something like that, and scouting around for images, tearing up science books, I never used anyone else's image. I was asked to do those prints that are in the other room, so I started putting one image with another, trying different ways of using, printmaking. And this is a print show, so printmaking is a big part of it. It's a big part. I don't know, I just kept doing it along with the other kind of things like dimensional.
But let's take those. You have, if I'm not mistaken, there are numbers of things getting mixed up in my jet lag, but you have a Renaissance image, right?
Mm-hmm.
Boat?
You mean the Uccello?
Uccello, yeah. And the boat is from when?
Pardon?
The boat is the ship model, the ship.
The ship was from engineers' drawings of ships.
It's like 18th century or earlier, right? No?
Maybe.
It doesn't matter. And then you have the sky, and then there's a rocket, and then there's also Duchamp.
Where's the rocket?
Isn't there a rocket in one of them?
There's a little airplane going down.
Okay, an airplane. Okay. And then there's Duchamp's rotor-relief.
Yeah.
Okay. That's an interesting set of things to be playing with. And in one of them you have a cycle of 3, but you shuffle the positions and the sizes.
Well, after I got through, yeah. Well, because I was shuffling things and I was thinking maybe I can get away from having that single image, which was getting a little oppressive, you know. So I put the images together and I was sort of playing around with them. And each one is like a different way of making prints. Well, they all sort of afterwards, I was thinking, I think it's in the book too, what shall I, you have to call things. I have so many things untitled that I'm sure people here went crazy. When you have to go through untitled, this, untitled that, and I never signed anything either. I did sign the prints and force you to sign the prints, and but I never really. Then I wanted to remove some part of myself from the work. You know what I mean? And just leave the evidence of someone having made a form and a structure. So the work is sort of cold, which I like. Because then you have to what? You have to find your place with it, sort of. It doesn't come out and tell you some wonderful story or anything.
Okay,
so anyway, wait, so loosely, it's a sort of theme of, different space things, the rotary device, which made this little wind and a surface. And then the night skies, which I got into because I was using the pencil, and I finally wanted to just see more pencil, more graphite. And I started doing dark things. And, the airplane is a little thing from my little airplane. I used to collect airplanes, model airplanes. I took airplane flying lessons. So there's a kind of theme about going through space and ships and...
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you, was if you say on the one hand you're looking for something that's cool and you like that, and you're trying to avoid obvious symbolism and so on, at the same time something must make you respond to those images. There must be some way in which they're significant to you. And one of your very good friends, or used to be a good friend anyway, was Jasper Johns, who's famously distant and at the same time all the time injecting himself into his choice of images and the way he makes them. And I wondered if you too are engaged in a parallel activity of identifying with but not wanting to be identified in the things you choose.
Yeah, but as he said, he takes an image and he takes a work, an image, an object, he does something to it, he does something more, he does another thing. I don't really do that, I don't do that. I don't really manipulate the image too much. I just collect it in a dense block. But I love Jasper Johns, and I got very inspired. He was doing prints also at Gemini. He was doing them with lead, those lead things with the no. He was really a terrific artist. But I think we sort of agree that it's hard to tell what part is really yourself, and what the work means. My feeling is it doesn't mean much. It's a sort of presence that comes out of human beings, and you either go for it or you don't, I don't think, recently I've been thinking nothing means too much. So I'm getting really old, right? No, but I mean meaning in terms of rushing to meaning. That something has to mean something.
Understood. But one of the things, I mean, there are two prints of Bruce Nauman's. One of them says, please pay attention, please, a kind of pleading one. And the other one's more imperative, it says, pay attention, motherfucker, right? But teaching people the lesson of how to pay attention can be done by other means. And I think, in a way, every one of your prints is a lesson in attention being paid to something. And then what the rewards are partly simply the act of paying equivalent attention by the viewer, to be caught up in the process of how the print is made by trying to read it as a process and as an image simultaneously. And that demands of people who are used to screens and fast turnover a sustained scrutiny that's really exceptional in our time. Is that partly what you're after?
Well, I mean, afterwards you would say maybe something like that, but I don't really try to get them to do anything. These are now things that are outside of me, and you know, I mean, I think the viewer makes all art, you know. It's sometimes I was reading, Carter Radcliffe, you know, who's writing, or I think one time he says, you know, the viewer is the person who detonates the art. He makes it go. He gives it, you know, either you do or you don't. You know, the viewer really has the art part. I mean, they either make it, can live with it, along with it, or not.
But you have a catalytic
I like
sense.
the word detonate. I like the word detonate. When I was in my purging thing in my 20s, I had this vision that I would make those war things and then have them blow up, something you wouldn't want to try now. But in a kind of a anger of trying to face something. So I don't know how angry these are. Maybe they're not so angry, but they're sort of impossible, which is similar.
Is the trauma of the war something of which you have explicit memories?
Pardon?
Is the trauma of the war something of which you have vivid memories or not?
No, just dim memories of, dim memories. No, I think I have gone through that phase. Dim memories, I don't even think about it. I mean, every day you open the paper, you think about war, but yeah, I mean, I would not say that I'm a happy-go-lucky artist that's trying to cheer people up into something, but I don't think that I have that in me, really. But I think I do have, I would like to have, you know, I mean, at a certain point, you look at a work of art and either you think, boing, you know, you get a little boing, little happiness, a little surprise, or not, right? Something like that.
Absolutely.
No, I don't.
But for example, in the text, there's one point where you said that the reason that you weren't involved in causes is that you basically had the feeling that it was a lost cause, that you had what you called an animal sense of doom. And
yeah. I was going to call a dog doom. Yeah. Doom.
I don't sense these as being doom-laden.
No.
But I do sense them as being about a world in which things have ceased to happen. And maybe the desire for a world in which things don't happen is a response to a world where things did happen.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, things happen perceptually and visually in the work.
Yes.
And these are the tools that I work, you know, this is what I work with to make you feel alive, to make me feel alive, you know. I mean, these are visually compacted information areas. But I don't like to refer so much to the outside, like some kind of meaning outside that I'm illustrating. First, that to me seems as if I am sort of putting the work down, like the work is not worth anything, that I have to somehow make it about something that someone would understand. I don't understand some of the work I do. You know, I don't, it comes from another part of you, you know, that is more complicated than words. Actually, my words are sort of complicated.
Yes,
but
they are. They're also quite eloquent. I mean, sometimes very simple and
yeah,
very blunt.
well, anyway.
Let me ask you, there are a number of books in the show, and
Yeah.
they involve poetry by other people. May Castleberry did one for the Modern, if I remember correctly, and she'd previously done for the Whitney. And I wondered if in your collaboration with writers, you think about what they have written, or whether, again, it's kind of parallel play.
No parallel playing. I never heard of, I really hadn't even read Czesław Miłosz, you know, who is a Nobel Prize guy, and I just liked the fact that he was from the Baltic, and we were both refugees, you know, from the Eastern Europe. And I never knew Elliot Weinberger. Somebody suggested him to me because he translated Chinese books, and we did this book, The Stars, which I did the cover for, which took like, you know, 9 months of horror. And you know, we have a translation in there of the poem that he wrote actually for me, which was really embarrassing and kind of wonderful in a lot of different languages. And these books are like projects that the museum thinks up that might be interesting, and they are kind of interesting, and they were interesting for me, but I never thought of really having, you know, reading the work and illustrating it, no.
I have a couple more questions, and I think we should open it up to things from the audience. But one has to do with the fact that many of these subjects are implicitly kind of infinite. And are you in any way connected to the traditional ideas of the sublime, or are you simply involved in these images?
I do not think of the sublime. I mean, no, these are, I don't think of, no, that would be a subject matter outside the work itself. I think that one of the things that the work has is stillness, which I think is intrinsic to work that hangs on the wall. You know, there's a stillness about it, but it's not really. So for some reason, I have an aversion to thinking in any way about, you know, what did you say?
The sublime. I mean, I'm not trying to impose a philosophical meaning of any kind, and there are several different versions of it, but when one sees, you know, vast firmaments, when one sees oceans, when one sees desert floors and so on, that could, in principle, go on forever, but actually stay contained within a relatively small sheet, there's almost a paradox in the object itself. It suggests vastness, but isn't vast itself. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about the traditional sublime in relation to what you're doing, which is something evidently very different.
No.
That's it? Okay. One more question, and then I'll open it to the house. For whatever it was, 12, 13 years, you didn't paint.
Yeah.
More recently, you have been painting.
Yes.
And I wonder how you view painting at this stage of your life in relation to that previous hiatus. And I wonder how you look at drawing in relation to periods where you have not seemed to draw very much.
I think it's impossible to do painting without drawing. That's number one. Because drawing is making decisions and having some kind of limits, and the limits are drawing. The limits and the proportion is what I consider drawing in my work. Here, most of it, although some of it has some line in it. And I think that painting is the most malleable material, and that's the one in which you can really put your energy, because that's the greatest. You know, I think because it's so malleable and it's so, you know, loose, and it's so that you can do anything with it. I'm sorry I didn't use paint for 12 years, actually. 15 maybe 12. And so printmaking has its own kind of coolness and crispness and hardness to it. You know, that's its quality, which I like that, actually, about the etching. You know, it's a kind of, but I think that painting is the possibility of expressing, or I guess I'd say I haven't been wanting to express anything, haven't I? Let me see. So,
it's all right, we're not going to quibble.
Painting is what my interest is, basically.
And I do, since I'm the chairman, I have the prerogative of the chairman to extend it a little bit. One more question, because I've skipped over both that object in the back room there, the globe, this print, which is another globe on that wall, and a whole body of work that you showed at David McKee in your last show at David McKee, which were tablets and on shelves and so on and so forth. You have gone back to making things that are surrogates for other things. And I wonder if you could talk about that sort of return to the approach that you had to making the very large objects, which many people at the time interpreted as being kind of the realization of Magritte's crazy surrealist room. Now you're doing something where you really cannot tell the difference between what might be the original and what you made.
No, you can tell the difference.
Well, then tell me about that.
Well, I've been painting. I make objects every now and then, because when you get into two-dimensional plane, it's like a lot of, you know, the two-dimensional plane is a difficult area, really, in some ways. And sometimes you make an object, you just feel so much better. You know, so I made a couple of objects out of printmaking material. One is a thing I found in an antique store, and the other was sort of when I was feeling the world was so fucked up and fragile. And somehow in school, I went to the school where they beat us all the time. Or I have that memory, they were always trying to, and somehow I hung up that world. So I made this little world because I was getting tired of having I was running away from my singularity, you know. But I always liked to paint everything. So then I did a series of things, you would have to see them, you know. Like I did a series of tablets inspired by the night skies. So I did a series of children's tablets, which kind of go back to your childhood and also encompass a kind of blackness and so forth. So, and I left the real object with the other one, and also the stones that I worked on when I got back into painting. And I mean, the thing about it is that you can see the difference. That's the point. You can see that, or there is a point. There, you can see the difference between something that is in one world and has been made in a totally different over time and everything, and is by accident and by nature, and something that is made by your own invention. You know, your own hand, and you can see the difference. The kick is seeing the difference and seeing how, I don't know, it's just a small point, but it's like you see the difference. It means, you know, it's a kind of a piece about looking, you know, looking to see what you can see. That one is invented, you get this little shock when you see that one is made and the other one not. That was this little offshoot that I made for a while. I think maybe actually, if we had if I had that little globe there, you would have that same feeling in that. Because the globe is very close to the object found.
Is the awareness or sort of phenomenological experience of time, two different times, one the time of making, the other the time of aging, part of what you're driving at?
What does that mean?
Well, things get old, antiques get old just by getting old, and we look at them with a different kind of regard than the new. Whereas the made old is something that took your time, your concentration, and that as we read it, we read kind of sympathetically. A little bit the way when you watch baseball, you sometimes make the move of the baseball player. When you look at somebody's paintings, you get involved in how that came to be. And that's a time-based thing. It's not just an optical thing.
I didn't quite understand that.
Well, I'm trying to describe my experience of looking at your work.
Yeah.
Is one where I both see something and I experience what I see as being an evidence of time. It's different than the time I see in the object which ages.
Yeah, maybe you think, boy, this took a long time.
No.
No.
Not like that, no.
No.
I kind of get slowed down.
Or, I usually get a question, how long did this take you?
You notice I didn't ask you that.
So not an art question. Then usually, a lot of artists get this. It doesn't matter if an art is made in a minute, like a wonderful drawing by a Tibetan master or something that is just fantastic, or if it takes forever, I don't think that's part of the thing. Yeah, maybe the time, I think it's a stillness that maybe inspires a kind of maybe the image. This is getting in territory I don't really like to talk about, because I don't want to go in that direction. I want to go in direction of a strong form, everything I just said. I don't have to say it again. I don't want to go in a direction that I'm interested in timelessness or something. But I am interested as much as all of you, but that is not really a theme or anything. But I think maybe if you...
I'm not going to belabor, but I'm not thinking about themes. I'm thinking about phenomenological experience. You experience time in different ways in one's life. Mm-hmm. And in your work, the sentiment of time being an issue is overpoweringly strong to me.
Really?
Okay.
You are a sweetheart.
Okay. I will let that one lie. Maybe it's time to open it up to the audience. If anybody in the audience has a question or a comment or whatever.
We've known each other for a while.
But we haven't done this before either.
But we haven't ever done this before. So don't think that in fact, I haven't talked to you for a long time now.
That's true, except in a couple of bars, so.
Right.
Anyway, somebody, has a mic.
I have a question. Is it important for you to make rules for yourself? Or
rules?
Yeah, like I do only black and white, but then I break the rule and I do a globe, even in color.
I don't really make rules, but I have kind of obsessions where I do one thing and I want to do it again, and I want to do it again, and I want to do it again. Maybe it's some psychological problem. But no. I mean, I don't think I'm alone. Many artists are like this, as you know. And you tend to have some kind of vague idea of what you might want to see back. And then you think, well, I didn't get it this time. I'll do it again, and maybe it'll come out. Or I'll do it again, and it'll come out, It's more like that, but I don't really have rules, but I have certain rules, like I never use an image of a person, for instance, or anything that is psychologically packed with information outside of the painting.
But stopping painting and then starting painting again?
No, they were not rules. They were like I was punishing myself, maybe, and dropping something that I thought was too decorative, that I couldn't find my way out of it. I thought if I picked up the pencil and some other medium, I would be able to go out of it. And I think I did get out of it, but I did have trouble getting back to painting. You haven't seen a painting show. If you've seen a painting show, you see there are a lot of weird, convoluted things in there that maybe that have some printmaking. There's a discussion between everything you do, sort of, in your studio. Kind of a back and forth, as you're making a sort of a world that is, I would like to say they're not so expressive, but I think that the restraint in the work is somehow expresses some kind of emotion that might be more hovering in there or something, instead of being somehow illustrated or whatever.
Remember, we're in Freud's hometown. Yes. Hubert, yeah. The mic will come over.
Do you listen to something when you work in the studio? Do you listen
to
music or?
I like to listen, yeah. You mean listen? Yeah, listen to the radio, of course. I listen to the PBS radio. I listen sometimes to jazz. Sometimes I listen to classical music, which I haven't had. Sometimes I have a friend, Ry Cooder, so I listen to world music of different sorts. And sometimes I don't listen to anything, but I don't usually really, that's, yeah.
Any favorite?
Pardon?
Any favorite thing?
Oh, any favorite music? Oh, I don't know. I just heard a couple of wonderful symphonies of Beethoven, the 6th and the 8th Symphony, about 2 feet away from the fiddler. Great. I don't know. Why don't you try, I don't know what I really like. I like a record by Ry Cooder called Ali Fakar Tour. It's with a musician from Africa. It's a very mellow, fantastic CD.
Thank you.
Vija? Here? Looking at your work, there's quite a strong feeling of solitariness, the time that you must have spent alone with yourself, working and reworking the works. Is the inherently collaborative nature of printmaking a real relief for you, or is it really agonizing to have to bring other people into the process?
I thought it would be agonizing, but it was a relief. And I have well, it was pretty agonizing when I did those, but when I went to Gemini, I found a terrific printer, Doris Simmelink, and her husband, Chris Sukimoto, who did a lot of the work. And she was so positive, and I was so negative, and we just really did thing. She was able to do a print so exquisite. Some of these are fantastically difficult to print. And I became like I could work with somebody there beside the cat, so it was really terrific. And I think I have maybe grown as a person because of it. And she helped me. She would, this big print there, that's a big plate of copper. that is 3 feet by whatever it is, 28 inches. So heavy to lift and so difficult to do that wiping, they wipe, and so difficult to wipe out the little white dots, which were so difficult to put in. I don't know, I'm never going to do this again, that direction. And, you know, I had an appreciation for her skill, which was really nice to feel. And I think I could do it. I can work with somebody in the room. Now I have some assistants, and I treat them like myself, sort of, better.
I have a question. Thank you very much, first of all, for the enlightening conversation to the both of you. And I should just preface this by saying I'm an art historian. So I'm curious to know, I see a kind of position that's very close to Jasper Johns in his Erase de Kooning, actually, in an attempt to somehow come to terms with this hyper subjectivity and gesture which you talked about. And I actually see this kind of boundlessness, this repetition, somehow akin to an Erase de Kooning in that way, by this overcompensation. And on the other hand, I see a kind of closeness to artists such as Ed Ruscha and every, you know, the Sunset Strip series, for example, and those kinds of photographic forms of de-skilling. And I wonder where you position yourself also in relationship to those kind of photographic practices of the West Coast as an attempt to come to terms with the kind of hypersubjectivity of de Kooning. Thank you.
Not Ed Ruscha. Ed Ruscha is the cleverest man. And his work is very relational to American, what do you call it? American life, American sayings, you know, the American culture, about which I know very little, actually, having grown up outside the culture. The same thing really for Mike Kelly, there were a whole group of people who dealt with those. And he's also a commercial artist who has a kind of a style. I have no style, you know. I don't know how I position myself. I used to, when I was through de Kooning, I kind of liked Ad Reinhardt and his sort of denial of trying to say what art is by listing what it is and not, you know. But I don't know, I try not to think about it, really, because it would just be not nice, really, whatever I came up with.
Can I just throw in a footnote? It was actually Robert Rauschenberg who erased de Kooning, not Jasper Johns. And there's a good story that goes with it, because Rauschenberg and de Kooning knew each other, and Rauschenberg admired de Kooning. And de Kooning gave him a drawing when requested, but he made sure that it was a very good drawing, number one, and number two, a very well-drawn, i.e. skillful drawing, number two, so that it would be hard for Rauschenberg to sacrifice. One, because it would take more elbow grease. It's almost, like, it's almost like one of her things, right? Taking it off is as hard as putting it on if it's a finely crafted surface. And two, that he would regret it. He would be sorry to lose this drawing. But years ago, only a few years ago, I did the catalog for Rauschenberg's personal collection. It turns out he already owned a de Kooning drawing. So de Kooning was thwarted in his attempts because Rauschenberg actually could destroy one and still have one to keep. So there, in other words, if you're going to play the Dada game, just be sure you don't play with somebody who's as smart as you are and plays it back at you. No, it's okay. Things happen, yeah. Any other, yeah, there's one hand there. Right behind you, I think.
I was wondering, while I was walking around the gallery and saw the images, because they're like really, I have to put a lot of concentration on them to look at them, and they really drag me into them, but I can't remember each image, and I wonder if you can remember each image.
Yes, I can.
Because
Yes.
especially those behind you, they're like really similar skies.
Yes,
And-
but not the same.
Yeah, no, not at all. But I was like, it fascinated me
Yes.
that they drag you in, but you can't really retell them.
No, I know all the images.
An astronomer would know the way to find themselves in this universe. So,
Perhaps finally, I would like to go back to this room and to this institution. I know that you are a very desired artist for institutions to be showing your work. Harvey Kempinger, the president of the Secession, came to New York to invite you for this show. What actually made you accept his invitation?
I asked somebody about Secession. And they said, it's a fantastic place. Do it. They said Bryce had been there. They said Johns had been there. They said, you know, Bob Irwin is there, who was one of my instructors at UCLA. He sent me all these books. I said, okay. And I'm really proud to be part of the folks here that have shown in this, this reminds me, Obama always says folks, doesn't he? People
every
that,
politician in America says folks now.
you know, have shown here at this very beautiful gallery that I guess changes a little bit every time. So, you know, I'm very helpful. I mean, that's really great that I have my, really, I had a retrospective sort of at the Met about 12 years ago or something, but this is got new work in it, and it's, you'd say, bitchin' to be here.
So thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you all.